Tonight, we're counting down 10 R&B songs from the 1960s that were quietly silenced before they ever had a real chance to be heard. These weren't prom hits or chart favorites. They were records that stirred something too raw, too honest, or too uncomfortable for their time. Back then, R&B carried stories through kitchen radios, barbershops, apartment walls, and slow night drives. But not every truth made it onto the airwaves. Some songs were pulled early, some barely pressed. Others were talked about more than they were played. These tracks didn't disappear because they lacked soul. They disappeared because they said something the world wasn't ready to hear yet. And when we reach number 1, you'll hear a song that told the truth long before anyone was prepared to listen. Let's begin with number 10. Number 10. Love is a Four-Letter Word by Ella Washington. It didn't shout, it didn't scream, it whispered its truth, and that was enough to make some radio stations flinch. Released in the mid-60s, Love is a Four-Letter Word wasn't your usual heartbreak ballad. It peeled back the layers of affection and frustration, and what sat beneath was something a little too sharp for some ears. This was a time when women in R&B were expected to either cry or swoon, but Ella Washington did neither. Her voice held a quiet weariness, a sense that she'd lived every line. The song didn't blame, but it didn't forgive either. It was honest, and sometimes honesty gets you banned. Set against a backdrop of lush organ swells and slow snapping drums, the track carved out space for reflection, the kind of late-night reflection that made some listeners uncomfortable, especially those in charge of airplay. What got it pulled wasn't just the title, though it raised eyebrows. It was the idea that love could be something bitter, empty, even profane, that it wasn't always sacred, that sometimes it felt more like a curse. And in a decade filled with hopeful harmonies and polished promises, that raw truth stood out. Too much for daytime radio, too much for the networks that preferred their women heartbroken but polite. It was a song that spoke softly and carried a heavy truth. Sometimes that's the most dangerous kind. Number 9. I'm Your Man by Big D. Irwin. Big D. Irwin had a voice like velvet soaked in smoke, smooth but not afraid to cut. When I'm Your Man dropped in the early 60s, it wrapped its rhythm in candlelight and promise. But under that gentle groove was something the censors didn't quite know how to handle. This wasn't a song about dancing in the moonlight or waiting by the phone. It was bold, confident, a declaration of ownership and desire that felt too intimate for some stations. Lines like, "No more waiting, no more games," sent a clear message. This wasn't about courtship. It was about claiming space in someone's heart, and maybe their bed too. In an era when male singers were still expected to keep a certain gentlemanly restraint, Big D's approach came off as too real, too physical. He wasn't being vulgar, he was being direct. And that was enough to scare off a few program directors who thought the public wasn't ready for such a clear invitation. What really pushed I'm Your Man into the shadows wasn't just the lyrics, it was the energy, that simmering, slow drag beat, the knowing smile in his voice. It felt like grown folks' music, and the gatekeepers wanted something safer for the teenagers tuning in after school. The record didn't get banned everywhere, but in key markets, it vanished, quietly, no explanation, just gone. And yet, for those who caught it before it disappeared, it lingered. Some songs whisper too close to the truth, and when they do, they don't just get censored, they get forgotten, until now. Number 8, The Rent Man by Sugar Pie, DeSanto. Sugar Pie. DeSanto always had fire in her step and a grin that said she'd seen it all. The Rent Man was one of those songs that could make you laugh, nod, and wince all at once. But behind the humor was a truth some folks in power didn't want playing over the air. Released in the mid-60s, The Rent Man danced around blues, R&B, and storytelling. It was catchy, sure, but it also called out a very real tension in black communities at the time. Surviving month to month under the weight of bills, bad landlords, and little mercy. The song follows a woman's tango with the man who comes knocking, expecting money she doesn't have. It's playful, even flirtatious, but there's a simmering frustration beneath it, a kind of exhausted charm born from knowing the system was never built to give her a fair shot. Radio stations didn't appreciate the picture it painted. Poverty wasn't supposed to have a voice, and when that voice came from a sharp-tongued woman who wasn't afraid to make light of her struggle, that made it even more dangerous. One station manager reportedly said the song made a joke out of hardship, but if you listened closely, there was no joke in Sugar Pie's delivery, only resilience. A wink, yes, but behind it, a sigh too many women knew too well. It wasn't just about rent, it was about survival, about having the nerve to sing when life kept pressing in. Sometimes songs get banned not because they're dirty, but because they're honest. Number 7, Mr. Welfare by Laura Lee. Laura Lee had a voice that didn't ask for attention. It commanded it. When she recorded Mr. Welfare, it wasn't just another soul number. It was a slow-burning protest, dressed in rhythm and blues. And for that, it didn't stand a chance. Released quietly in the late 60s, the song called out the bureaucratic coldness of the welfare system. It wasn't theoretical. It was personal. You could hear the frustration in her phrasing, the weariness wrapped in every syllable. Laura wasn't singing about policy. She was singing about dignity, stripped and rationed. The lyrics took direct aim. She didn't paint vague metaphors. She asked why someone working 3 jobs still couldn't feed her kids, why help came with judgment, why survival had to come with shame. That kind of song didn't sit well with station owners whose advertisers preferred cheerier programming. Some labeled it too political. Others feared backlash. A few simply said, "It's not appropriate for entertainment." But Laura Lee wasn't trying to entertain. She was trying to be heard. The record didn't get wide distribution. It vanished from playlists. DJs were told to choose something else. And just like that, a song that could have stirred conversation disappeared into the grooves of forgotten vinyl. Still, for those who caught it, even once, the message stuck. Sometimes music doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be true. Number 6, Funeral Blues by Bobby Marchin. Bobby Marchin was always a voice that bent the rules, a showman, a storyteller, and one of the few openly gender-bending performers of the R&B circuit in the early 60s. But when he recorded Funeral Blues, it wasn't his stage presence that shook the industry. It was the song's unflinching sorrow. The track was sparse, just piano, a low thump of bass, and Bobby's voice. Tired, trembling, aching. He sang not of a broken heart, but of death, real death, and not in the metaphorical way R&B often used it. This was a goodbye to a lover, sung without euphemism. What got it banned wasn't just the grief, it was the implication. This was a same-gender love, lost. A man mourning another man with no apology in the lyrics. Quietly, boldly, it refused to hide. In an era when such love was criminalized in many places, radio stations backed away. Even stations that had supported Bobby's earlier work passed on Funeral Blues. Some cited the heavy subject matter, others were more blunt. They didn't want to deal with the questions it might raise. There was no scandal, no headlines, just silence. The kind that follows when a song tells the truth about a kind of love the world wasn't ready to hear. But that record still found its way into jukeboxes in the right bars. Played low, late at night, for those who needed it most. Some songs aren't banned because they offend. They're banned because they reveal. If this is bringing back memories or showing you something new, subscribing helps keep these voices and stories from fading. One click helps honor the artists who never got their fair moment in the spotlight. Number 5, Chain Reaction by the Vontastics. There was a tension in the air by 1907, cities swelling with protest, voices rising, lines being drawn. And Chain Reaction by the little-known Chicago group The Vontastics sounded like a spark thrown into dry leaves. It didn't open with fury. It crept in, slow and deliberate. A dusty guitar riff, steady drums, then harmonies that felt like they were holding something back. And then it let go. The lyrics spoke of injustice, not in lofty poetry, but in street-level clarity. They named what people felt in their bones, that every slap, every shut door, every slur was part of a larger reaction, one that couldn't be stopped once it started. The song never encouraged violence, but it didn't flinch from its possibility. It understood the temperature of the time. It mirrored it. That's what made it dangerous. Many stations never gave it a chance. The word came down from above. Don't stir the pot. Others pulled it after a single spin. There were rumors, none confirmed, of the record being removed from store shelves in certain cities. Not because it was crude, not because it was explicit, but because it named something real. What stung even more was that the Vontastics were on the verge. They had the sound, the look, the hunger. But chain reaction clipped their wings before they had the chance to fly. Sometimes the wrong song at the wrong time can bury a career, but it can also mark a moment, a heartbeat of truth captured before it was silenced. Number 4, Secret Rendezvous by Irma Thomas. Irma Thomas was known as the soul queen of New Orleans, and rightly so. Her voice could pour comfort like warm tea or slice through a lie with one note. But Secret Rendezvous never got the same stage as her other recordings, and not because of the music, but because of the story it told. Released in 1966 on a small regional label, the song wrapped itself in candlelight and caution. It was sultry, yes, but not in a scandalous way. It told the story of two lovers meeting quietly, not out of shame but out of necessity. One was married, the other was tired of waiting. The issue wasn't the infidelity. Plenty of hits flirted with forbidden love. What rattled the censors was how Irma sang it, with compassion, with understanding, with a kind of grace that made you feel for both people involved. Radio stations in the South refused to touch it. The implication that love outside of rules could still be tender and true was too much. A few newspapers even ran editorials about decency in music, naming the track without quoting a single lyric. Behind the scenes, the label folded, the record faded, and Irma never mentioned it much in interviews. But fans who heard it live in smoky Louisiana clubs never forgot. It wasn't lewd, it wasn't rebellious, it was human. That's what made it powerful. And sometimes, what's most human is what makes people uncomfortable. Number 3, Preacher's Son by Barbara Lynn. Barbara Lynn had a way of playing the guitar that made you stop and listen, not just because she was a woman in a space mostly claimed by men, but because she played like she meant every word she was about to sing. And in Preacher's Son, recorded in 1965, every word hit like a hush across a pew. The song spun the story of a girl's quiet romance with a preacher's boy, full of stolen glances and Sunday night meetings behind the chapel. But this wasn't innocent hand-holding. The lyrics hinted at real passion, real rebellion, and most of all, it hinted at the preacher himself not being too pleased. The controversy didn't come from the sensuality. It came from who she was calling out. The idea that a preacher's child, raised under the eye of righteousness, might sneak out for love was too much for some folks in charge of airwaves, especially in the Bible Belt. One small town station in Georgia reportedly received complaints after a single airing, not because of vulgarity. There was none, but because of disrespect. Others followed suit. DJs quietly removed it from their crates. What's rarely talked about is how many girls, black and white, heard that song once and felt seen, felt like their own whispered truths were finally being sung. Barbara didn't shout. She just told it how it happened, and for that the song was quietly buried. But even buried songs leave roots, and they grow back in memory. Number 2, Heat in My Hands by Maxine Brown. Maxine Brown could turn a phrase into a feeling like few others. Her voice held elegance, but never fear. And in Heat in My Hands, recorded in 1964 and quietly shelved, she sang about something that rarely found its way into songs: desire. spoken clearly from a woman's point of view. The arrangement was smooth, draped in strings and soft organ, but Maxine's delivery was the fire. She wasn't waiting to be chosen. She was choosing. Her hands, her body, her longing. They weren't veiled in metaphor. They were named. The lyrics weren't obscene. They were specific, and that's what got them blacklisted. The gatekeepers could handle heartbreak. They could handle begging. But a woman claiming her own yearning without apology? That was crossing the line. The record barely made it past a test pressing. One executive reportedly called it inappropriate for public consumption. Another said it made him uncomfortable in the wrong way. The track was shelved. Not banned officially, just never given a path to exist. But a few acetates got out. One ended up on a jukebox in Harlem, another in a basement radio show in Detroit. And for those lucky enough to hear it, it felt like a moment of rare honesty. Maxine never fought for its release. Maybe she knew the walls weren't ready to come down yet. Or maybe she already said what she needed to say and left the rest to time. Some songs are too early, not too bold, just too early. Number 1, Shadow Lover by Jimmy Armstrong. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from having to hide who you are. And in 1963, Jimmy Armstrong sang about that kind of loneliness in a way that was too raw, too revealing, and far too ahead of its time. Shadow Lover was a ballad in the purest sense. Just piano, brushed drums, and Jimmy's voice. Gentle, aching, honest. He never used a name, never gave gender, but you could hear it in the way he sang. The hesitation, the yearning, the ache of loving someone you couldn't walk beside in daylight. The lyrics never said anything explicit. That's part of what made the song so powerful. We talk through glass and meet in dreams, he sang. My love lives behind drawn curtains. It was poetry, but it wasn't vague. It was coded survival. When the record was submitted for radio play, it was quietly returned. Labels passed. A few test copies circulated among collectors and a handful of open-minded DJs. But officially, it never existed. No press, no charting, no reprint. Years later, it was discovered in a box of rejected demos at a shuttered New Jersey studio. Some call it the first queer R&B ballad ever recorded. Others say it was just a love song too honest for its decade. Jimmy Armstrong never became a household name, but in that one recording, he gave voice to those who'd lived in silence. Shadow Lover wasn't banned because it was loud. It was banned because it was real. And sometimes, that's the hardest truth of all. Looking back at these songs, you realize it wasn't always about what was said. It was about who was saying it and when. These weren't just records, they were risks. Each one a thread pulled from a tightly woven fabric of silence. To those who remember, thank you for listening. And to those hearing these stories for the first time, thank you for feeling them. If these moments moved you, liking the video helps keep these memories alive, quietly, truthfully. And if you're ready for more, there's another door just waiting to open. Click on our next video, where we uncover the 10 R&B bands that vanished after one perfect album, that survived the bans and still shook the world. We'll see you there, quietly.